Quick disclaimer that this is being recorded as the Vikings and Chargers game is taking place. So some of the numbers might be one or two spots off, but it doesn't fundamentally change anything ranking related. And first off, we have a really kind of dull team in the Cardinals who they are good in a couple notable ways. Chiefly, their defense is playing at a pretty darn high level relative to what their talent is. So that is nice, but they still don't have amazing talent on the defensive side. So it is kind of an overachieving look for them. They just kind of have sufficient players and really good coaching, seemingly, with Jonathan Gannon having the defense clicking. So defensively, they have a defensive expected points added greater than Green Bay and right there with Kansas City and Jacksonville. So that's pretty legit. The troubling part for them is that Kyler Murray has less expected points added per dropback than Jacoby Brissett does, and a mere one expected points added better than Brissett's zero for rushing. So, with that said, they're going into the building tier. They're going to be solidly high on that front, but they're not really in the mix for anything. And they are kind of glaringly weak in lots of ways. A better version of this team in lots of ways is Hotlanta, who Penix ranks sixth worst for me in my compilation QB metric that combines basically every meaningful stat into one with some various weighting for which stats seem to matter more. So it makes you wonder if the mega reach on him for a team that was far from being good was the right pick or not. Um, Fortunately for them, though, the 32 first they've spent on edge rushers in this past draft is paying off a good bit. And, they only have a solid defensive head coach, I would say. Raheem Morris, not a great defensive mind, just a fine one. And, not really too high end of a head coach. But, you know, the talent is solid. They do have a good defensive line. They have solid contributing players in the secondary. Not really a lot of guys that you just see as terrible on the defense. So they roughly end up top 10 in defensive expected points added. They're, I think, pretty solidly they're not going to be in the mix for like number one, but I don't think they're a playoff team either. Baltimore, so tricky because if they're right, they should be in the Super Bowl or bust category, but their dilemma is they're basically never right. And that's on full display with Lamar being hurt and, there being some questions there. The offensive line hasn't been good. In defense of their offense, it's probably a bit better than it looks, in addition to not having Lamar, of course, because they've played the number one opponent defensive expected points added schedule. And, that's going to restrict the offense a good deal. And, really, Cooper Rush being as bad as he has been makes it hard to evaluate much of anything else aside from, the offensive line just not being good. So they are really tricky. They are also really tricky because their defense should be amazing. Just not having the elite defensive line, but It's not the worst in the league. It's, you know, got some talent mainly in the interior now with Odafe Owe not being there, but they also have played the number one offense of schedule for expected points added. So that deflates it a good deal as well. And their record is just really rough at the moment. So, you know, they have lots of things that make you wonder. They have one win at this point, which is leaving them really behind the eight ball. But a little bit of a spoiler alert, the AFC North is not good. The Steelers aren't going to rank highly, and they're going to be the best team aside from Baltimore. But with all of this said, Baltimore really is behind the eight ball. I'm going to say playoffs and pray. Such a hard eval again. They could really be in the mix for not making the playoffs at all. I think that is very much in play. But with their high end being so high, I do think they should go there for, some valid reasons. Buffalo, another kind of weird one because they're inherently weird in that even though Josh Allen is a team savior, the best quarterback they've ever had in their franchise, maybe just the best player they've ever had in their franchise, I think probably definitely the most valuable. But they still hate him for some reason and try to make him work as hard as they possibly can by giving him no support in any way. So, really odd situation there. Allen continues to shine, even as the only real thing he has going for him is that his offensive line is good. The pass protection is good, not elite, but good. And Dalton Kincaid is a really solid tight end that was a great prospect and is really showing that now with amazing contributions as his yards per route run is in the elite top 5 category for tight ends. He's really their only option though that's efficient with any sort of solid reps. Khalil Shakir is nice as like your third guy as a slot short yardage type of deal. Keon Coleman not really, you know, too much of a known commodity, leaving a lot to be desired. Josh Palmer just kind of okay. It's a lot of okay on the offense. Dalvin Cook or James Cook rather, is good running back, not really one that moves the needle though. And, that last year with the 20 touchdowns was more than he had pretty much every other year combined. So it's not really too much of a thing. Defensively, it's insultingly bad how awful their run defense is. It gives a bad impression for people that think being analytical is, not caring at all about the run game. It's not. What the Bills are doing is not analytical. It's just dumb and bad team management because they're just giving up free yards in the rush because they don't care. They don't have good guys to defend the run. Ed Oliver being their most notable interior is not a really proficient run defender. And they also don't even put bodies there. They're so in love with their too high shell that, does stop big plays in pass coverage, but restricts what you can do for the run game and also what you can do for short yardage stuff, especially because they don't really have good coverage linebackers either. And the too high shells puts them in more of a conflict there as well. So it's a lot of dumb things. Sean McDermott needs to go at this point. He hasn't had good coaching versus good teams basically ever. His philosophy is horrendous when it comes to the running stuff. They are behind the eight ball a bit on defense as well because they don't really have a star player again. Basically, the only real star they have on their entire team is Josh Allen. Kincaid is in that mix, but that's really it. And, defensively, though, awful safeties, probably the worst in the league. Tons of meh, no star talent to mitigate it. So it really just is what Josh Allen can do for them. I hate this because they should be in the Super Bowl or bust. Josh Allen is that caliber of player, but I'm going to put them in the dark horse. I think they would surprise me if they really put it together to get a Super Bowl, and that's with the AFC being pretty darn weak. So this is really annoying for me, as you can probably tell. I'm so disappointed in how things have transpired because they've made lots of moves that looked like bad moves with not, investing sufficiently on the D line, giving some contracts to defensive players that are just fine, things of that nature, focusing so much on the ground and pound that is fine. Not really elite though, aside from what Allen can do, which, you know, he's going to do whether they invest a lot in that or not. Just really stupid all around. They need an amazing draft where they get like two star players, honestly, to really put themselves at a point where they're not so deficient talently. So I put them in as a dark horse. I would be surprised if they can really hang, even with, again, the AFC being really weak. Carolina, really weird situation there. They have the erratic Bryce Young, an okay offensive line with okay pass protection, the league's worst receivers, and probably worst coaching as well. Dave Canales doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe doesn't belong in the league, to be completely honest. Maybe he can go back to OC, but this is so bad what he's done. But their offense ends up being about neutral. So, really, a testament, I guess, to Bryce Young being good when he's good. That's the only thing I can think of. They have a solid run game as well, with, you know, some of the best running back performances you'll see out of nowhere. Defensively, kind of a similar deal in that despite having almost no talent, they're above average in defensive expected points added. So that's odd as well. They're not a good team, though. They're not in the mix for anything. I'm going to put them in the number one pick or building tier. I don't think they're good enough to really escape number one pick mix. So, yeah, that's where they go. I don't think they're as good as Arizona. Chicago, they are definitely showing some life, but the new offensive line and Ben Johnson catering exactly to DeAndre Swift and being a good run game play caller still results in a bottom 10 rushing expected points added for them, but they have a greater than average passing expected points added, which is a good sign. Maybe Caleb, really is going in the right direction. He definitely looks a lot less clueless than he did last year, so that's really solid. Defensively, the Oda Ingbo overpay is confirmed as being an overpay as far as I'm concerned. He has half of Josh Sweat's pressures, or Montez Sweat rather, sorry. Um, and he has the same amount of pressures as safety Jaquan Brisker, despite Brisker being a safety and rushing 20% as much as Dio has. So that is really embarrassing. Chicago is just not at a good level for, a lot of key places. The receivers, not what they need to be either. So, you know, lots up in the air for them. I I think they go in as maybe the top, no playoffs, no number one team. They can be feisty with Caleb being really good when he's at his best. Some other support there, not a bad defense. So, not an embarrassing team, but I don't think they really have any playoff aspirations, to be completely honest. Cincy, awful. Flacco in Jake Browning versus bad Flacco in just old Flacco has, you know, been an interesting thing for them for sure. But old man, bad Flacco has revived Chase and Higgins' fantasy hopes. So that's at least something. The offense remains bad, though. Not able to run at a good enough level. No pass protection. Flacco's terrible. Not really much better than Browning, honestly. Defensively, they're about as bad as expected, which is to say, they're awful. So there's a lot here that makes them really rough. I think they go in the no playoffs, no number one part. I could really easily see them in the number one pick building tier because there's just so much wrong with this team. But, you know, they are a little bit alive at the moment. They somehow have 3 wins. So that has them a little bit in the mix. And, maybe they do get Burrow back at the end of the season. They, you know, don't completely fall out of the mix and then he saves them. So I don't think that's really in the cards, but that prevents them from being number one for me. So Cleveland, really hilarious stuff there. Seems like they are cursed after trading for the Predator. PFF's notably worse pass blocking and dominant quarterbacks like old man Flacco and late round rookie Dylan Gabriel has them neck and neck with Tennessee in passing and overall offensive expected points added. Really embarrassing. Defensively, they're tied for number one run defense, and Garrett remains top tier with some help on the line, be it in Graham, who's a high talent young player, Harris, other contributors around him. The coverage has talent, but you wouldn't really know it by watching them. Lots of coverage bust, lots of disappointing play. Denzel Ward's been really overrated for his career just because he was drafted so highly and is really fast. But, he's not a terrible player. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with them, let's say. Interesting in that, they're terrible in lots of ways. And then just kind of, you know, not that level. In others, I'm going to put them behind Carolina even, just because Carolina can show a little bit of a pulse on offense. A team, though, that can show lots of pulse on offense is the Dallas Cowboys. They are closer to the unanimous GOAT in Daniel Jones's number one Indy for expected points added on offense than they are to Satan's number 3 Kansas City, despite 1/3 of Dallas's offense in Lamb being hurt, which shows that this iteration of Dallas's triplets, which is their best version by far, can really be good. Dak is playing out of his mind. There's so much talent at their 2 receivers that are good. The rest suck for the most part, but, the offensive line is also bad. But darn it, the star talent is really star driven. So defensively, a lot less good. Turns out having no strengths and tons of weaknesses isn't actually a recipe for success. They kind of followed Buffalo's recipe on that one by also being really squishy. So they are a odd team. I'm going to put them in the playoffs and pray tier. I'm going to put them ahead of Baltimore just because I do think with Lamar still not being really, you know, for sure in the fold, there is a lot of skepticism there. So I feel a little bit safer about Dallas. Their defenses honestly have sucked at similar levels, even though Baltimore should be a lot better. So, you know, hard decision. Both teams very volatile, I feel. Another volatile team is the Denver Broncos, despite having a 34-year-old vet quarterback in second year man Bo Nix. He's been bottom 10 in my compilation QB metric, which I will be doing an updated tiering of quarterbacks as well. So be on the lookout for that. Seemingly everyone else is doing their job on offense. The offensive line remains amazing. The defense, insane pressure, so much elite pressure generated by them, and a lot of it's being converted to sacks at honestly kind of absurd rates, which you expect that to regress some. It's a bit lucky, but it does speak to how good their line is as well. They have some nasty pass rush, a stout run defense, good coverage that can be great. You figure Barron was a great prospect that hasn't really performed too well to this point, but corner is a little bit of a slow burn. So, you know, there's some real stuff going on there. And, it's just mainly going to be Bo Nix. Can you stop sucking and play at just a respectable level? I put them in the playoffs and pray tier. There's, certainly a world where they could go on a run. Their defense just plays really stifling. Knicks plays good enough. They get some success on the ground. But a much better team than them in lots of ways is, their counterpart in the DE, this time Detroit, not Denver, of course, who Detroit, despite losing two all pro level offensive linemen in Kevin Zeitler and Frank Ragnow, the better one, but Zeitler was amazing last year as well, and the best offensive coordinator available last season. They're sixth in expected points added on offense. A lot of that. St. Brown, Gibbs, just outrageously good players. Laporta, really good. Goff is playing at a solid high level. So, the offense really clicking as they should. And, Dan Campbell going for every single fourth down he can, not following the analytics one bit, just going, real aggressive though. So he's the one coach that doesn't follow the analytics, but is too aggressive. Everyone else is still a little bit too cowardly. But Dan Campbell is like, nope, fourth and 99. And, first quarter, we're up 7. Let's go for this. We'll convert it for sure. So very fun stuff they have there. And then defensively, there's lots of fun stuff as well. Aiden Hutchinson, first in pressures in the entire league for all players. Number 2, it has 38. Hutchinson has 10 more at 48. That's crazy. Al-Qadim Muhammad, revitalized, better than he ever has been, is number 13 in pressures. So they have a top tier pressure group from their edge guys basically alone. Defensive tackles has a good rotation. Lots of you know, defined skill sets, but there are some, you know, I'm drawing a blank on the best defensive Ali McNeil rather. He's, I think, as balanced as it gets. Reader more of the run stopper, Roy Lopez more of the pass rusher. There's some, defined stuff there, but they're good at what they are. And McNeil does a little bit of everything. Reader's not a bad pass rusher. He's just more of a run stuffer, though. So, the run D remains good. Coverage can improve, but it's not horrible. So things are shaping up well for their defense for certain. They go in the Super Bowl or bust tier, first team there, but not for long because Green Bay, I have a little bit of a love affair with. I don't like Micah Parsons because he did do lots of just straight up sexual assault in the hazing he would do to his college players at Penn State, which is what they're good for over there. But you know, aside from him, I like a lot of this team. I like LaFleur as a coach. I think he is amazing and somehow a little bit understated, I would say, despite having like the greatest win percentage ever for a coach. I don't think that's any more the case, but it was for a bit. And, it's not just, well, he's had Rodgers and Love. He was getting the most out of Rodgers, who was kind of floundering for a bit and has floundered since. So LaFleur had to be involved in that. The pass blocking has disappointed a lot. They're about average. They should be elite. They're still top 5 in passing and top 10 in rushing, though, showing great balance, great coaching, top 5 play from Love as well. So a lot to like there. Jacobs just playing all right, but maybe he gets the burst back a bit more and can play at a higher level, and the offensive line gives him some more stuff to work with. Defensively, despite not having the best coverage unit in the league, they've performed like it. PFF gives them the best coverage grade. Parsons not just wrecking, underclassmen's lives with hazing. He's wrecking games at the NFL level, generating tons of pressure, not at a top 2 level, but generating lots of pressure while being focused on, helping in the run game. They finally have a good run defense, which is like maybe the first time in my entire lifetime that's been the case. So this good defense could be elite. They're above average as it stands now. Really, really balanced, as I said. Debating here strongly between Detroit and Green Bay. I numbers wise have Detroit higher, so I guess I'll put them there, but my heart almost wants to put Green Bay there, despite liking Detroit as well. I don't know. I feel like I have a certain affinity for this Packers team, so there is a little bit of that bias there. So, with that said, though, they are just really good as well. There's no denying that. So, really in the mix with Detroit, same division, so that's fun. Here with Houston, very worrying times for them in the sense that, 2 wins, not great now. And even more so, though, they have a bottom 10 offensive expected points added. And Stroud's great, but honestly overstated a fair amount. Rookie year seems more and more like a fraudulent thing, as Houston's offensive expected points added being so bad. And, people will just play it off as, oh, the offensive line sucks. The offensive line sucks. It's bad. It's not the worst in the league by any measure. And in fact, it's worse for their expected points added on offense than Seattle, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, both LA teams, Dallas, and Miami. And all of those teams have a worse PFF pass blocking rank. So got to take some accountability there for Stroud for once. He's not playing at a high enough level. Nico Collins remains what should be a top tier receiver. So Kirk's been good as well. Yes, the line not satisfactory by any stretch, but lots of teams have worse lines and better offenses, one of which being the Steelers, who don't even have a good quarterback. So Stroud needs to be a lot better. It's getting to the point where it's like, what's the contract extension going to look like there? Because they still got some time on that, but at this point, he's had more bad than good in the NFL, and that's not great. So defensively, very, very different. Best defensive expected points added in the league at minus 21 for expected points added per play. Negative being, of course, better for defense, means you're preventing points. So the next closest is less than half as dominant at minus 10. They are so incredibly good. No weaknesses really, lots of strengths. Pretty good you know, pretty good recipe there. So they are, you know, very polar. I think I think they're in between playoffs and pre and dark horse. I am, however, more inclined to say playoffs and prey because Stroud is just not at a level that makes you feel good about a Super Bowl. So the next team here, very different because Daniel Jones is at a level that makes you think Super Bowl, insanely enough. Tyler Warren, 14th in yards per route run, 3 wide receivers in the top 50. Doesn't sound like the highest praise, but 32 teams should, you know, have less than 2. They have 3. And they also have a tight end there, like I said, at 14. Jones has played like a top 5 quarterback. Great offensive line, great pass blocking, really helping in the run game. They have hungry, great revitalized running back play and Jonathan Taylor, to the point that as a running back, even he is helping the team win. Shane Steichen helping a lot as a head coach, dialing up great plays like he's been known to do, but just really hasn't had the quarterback help to do. They form easily the league's best offense to this point in the season. They're number 3 in expected points added for passing, number 1 in rushing. Amazing stuff what they've done. And, based on that alone, they're going really high. But also defensively, Latu and Buckner are both tied, which is cute, on the same team, edge rusher defensive tackle duo. Number 8 in pressures. Love to see it. Latu was getting a little bit doubted because he was a high floor pick that didn't perform amazingly as a rookie. Was worried about not being fast enough, not being strong enough, not being big enough, what have you. But he has really played amazingly with those number 8 in pressures. But they only combined for 5 combined sacks, which to me represents this team, this defense in particular, so well, because they are so functional and not flashy. Lou Anarumo, great pickup, amazing pickup. He's gotten this defense clicking. So they are a great team. Honestly, sort of the opposite for me of Buffalo, in that, Jones is playing at an Allen level, but you didn't expect it. But the rest of the team, lots and lots of solid contributors. I'm I'm gonna be lame and put them in as a dark horse. I still don't totally have faith in this team because I do fear Daniel Jones coming back to earth with such a baseline of not being this quarterback. That is where I think he ends up, just sort of just being good. But even if that's the case, I think they are in the dark horse. It's just, they're low in the dark horse. If that happens, right now they're about as high as it gets, could very well be in the Super Bowl or bust area. Jacksonville, not so high on them, with good reason. Lawrence is bottom 10 in my compilation stat. The run game, pass blocking has been very good, so that's at least something. But, the most important stuff is really bad with Lawrence, so that puts a cap on things. They do have a lot of people confused by their 4 wins. They make people think they're good. They're not a good team. Trayvon Walker, the reach on him continues to look worse as Aiden Hutchinson crushes. And that Tyson Campbell trade that was bad is looking bad as expectedly. He's outplaying Newsome at corner. So, you know, lots of bad management there, but at least they do have Josh Hines Allen playing at an amazing level, and they still have the elite linebacker duo. So they're not a good team. Don't let their record deceive you. They're going to keep coming back to earth. I'm going to put them in as not playoffs, not number one. I'm going to put them ahead of Atlanta, but behind Chicago because Chicago has a much, much higher ceiling. So, they at least have a little bit of stuff that makes you wonder what they can be. Kansas City, definitely overstated in recent memory. Last year, they had that fraudulent year where they won every one score game, and people are like, oh, it's different. Every team that wins every one score game has been lucky. But this Chiefs team is different. They're winning those one score games because of Mahomes and Andy Reid and Spags and Chris Jones and Snead. And, they are not Snead. Sorry, I always do that. McDuffie. Um, at least Snead was amazing for Kansas City for a bit. So McDuffie's not being insulted, even though I think McDuffie's better than Snead was. But either way, they're different. They're somehow not good enough to beat teams convincingly, but they're good enough to win those 50-50 games, which never made a lick of sense to me. Every team that wins every close game is lucky. Every team that loses every close game is unlucky. That's just the facts of it. And Kansas City's already lost 3, I think, one score games it is this season compared to their 0 last year. That I think remained a 0 because that stat, very misleading, doesn't factor in them getting blown out by 50, which when they lose in the Super Bowl, they lose by 50. So that's hilarious. I know they didn't actually, since they got those garbage time touchdowns and whatnot, and the Xavier Worthy Simps were like, oh, he played so well down the stretch of that game. It was a great performance. It was like, yeah, he really did beat up on those fifth and sixth string cornerbacks and the safeties that were linebackers because they just wanted everybody to not get hurt for the next season. The game was already decided. All of that is to say, Chiefs tend to be very fraudulent in the past couple years, maybe as much as 3, honestly, where they did have a lot of breaks go their way. Definitely this year and last year, deceiving lots of people. So, you know, with that said, though, Mahomes has finally remembered how to play quarterback at a high level, which is good for his fans. He's not a good guy. There's not really any good guys on their team. Lots of bad ones, in fact. Basically, their entire receiver room. Lots of bad character guys there. So I do have a little bit of a bias there, as you might be able to sniff out, but the stats do reflect it. Mahomes, and basically no stat has been even very high end in the past year, at least. His last elite year was 2022, where he was exceptional, about as good as it gets. 2023 and 2024 don't speak about those. The numbers there, they don't tell the story. It's all about the wins. And when he loses, it's all about the numbers. If he has good numbers, or even then, the numbers don't matter and the wins don't matter either. It's Mahomes we're talking about. He's on just a different level for some reason. Nothing can convey how good he is. The eye test, the stats, nothing, the wins, it doesn't matter. So this year, he ranks as quarterback 6 for me. Really high end for him in the past 3 years. So, PFF's number 3 pass blocking offensive line helps. They still do get away with a lot of their false snap stuff because they do generate money for the league. So the league does want to see them succeed. There is that paper that I will link that shows a lot of concerning stuff that, it seems like they are getting benefits in the playoffs, which people like to say is a conspiracy, but there's stats out there that show that it's a 1% chance for lots of things to happen at random, and that becomes even smaller when they're all happening at random, seemingly in conjunction with each other. It starts to seem like there's something more there. So they get lots of benefit come playoff time, so that helps them, even as they're not really much of anything in the regular season continually. Defensively, still have the elite coverage. McDuffie's amazing. Chris Jones is amazing. Spags dials up great blitzes, continues to help support the offense. So they are, all in all, despite me saying they're fraudulent, which I stand by 100%, they are benefiting a ton from the AFC being weak. They are benefiting a ton from ref help come playoff time. So I'm putting them in the Super Bowl or bust, getting the amount of help they're going to get in both of those regards, and Mahomes potentially being back to being great. Not necessarily best quarterback in the league. Maybe that ship has sailed since there's been such a layoff in that, but you know, there's no reason they shouldn't at least get to the Super Bowl. I think Detroit and Green Bay much better teams, in all honesty, but you know, Kansas City has a puncher's chance, so that's something. Chargers, they are just one of the most frustrating teams around. They have pulled the wool over lots of people's eyes by making people think Jim Harbaugh is a good coach, ignoring that Greg Roman is one of the worst OCs in the league, doesn't know at all how to script passing plays, has good run games, nothing amazing to outweigh just how abysmal he is with passing. He's neutered Lamar Jackson, he's neutering Herbert. He's a bad coordinator. He just is part of the old guard that's, we want to ground and pound and, play like old school football, like God intended, where we do things that don't work on offense, but they make us look manly because it's so cool getting a 2-yard rush 3 times in a row and then punting. That is really manly alpha stuff. So, with that said, even with the coaching holding back Herbert a lot, Herbert himself isn't playing at his best right now, but how much of that is having a bottom 5 pass protection? 47-year-old Keenan Allen as his number 1 so far. The offensive line, again, being so terrible. Him being behind the 8 ball because he only gets to pass on, 3rd and 8 after they have 2 unsuccessful runs. Hard to say. Defensively, they're not talented there either. Jesse Minter continues to make practice squads look proficient, as the coverage is great and the run defense is bad, but not nearly as bad as it should be. So they are, you know, not not a high end team, but there's enough there that make you think, what if though? So I'm putting them in the playoffs and pray. They're praying that Greg Roman gives, play calling duties and scheming to someone else, and Jim Harbaugh stays away from any X's and O's stuff since he doesn't know that. He is just a culture guy, doesn't know offense or defense. So, just kind of get out of the way, guys. Let Herbert do his thing. Let Minter do his thing. Let Minter do everything. Honestly, coaching wise, he's an amazing coach and the only competent coach in that you know high end tier of guys for them. So a much better Los Angeles team with an also offensive pass blocking is the Rams. Hopefully, it's just because of injuries with like Havenstein. I believe their other tackle Jackson, Lyric Jackson, I believe, is the one that's been hurt as well. So, hopefully it's just that. They are PFF's sixth worst pass blocking unit, though, so that is really worrying. But, don't tell that to Matthew Stafford, who seemingly found the time machine or the fountain of youth or something. And he certainly has found Puka and Adams, I'll tell you that much. Because it's just every single play is seemingly, 8 yards to Puka, 14 to Adams, 27 for Puka. It's unreal. He's doing lots of flashy plays too, where he's like rolling left, throwing right, doing Mahomes stuff. But, it's actually all working for Stafford and not just showing up on highlight reels the one time it does. So, Stafford, incredible play. So, those three guys alone pretty much have the offense at an above average level. Defensively, dominant defensive line that comes at you in waves with unique strengths. Puna early, Fisk late. They have so much talent just all around. It's insane. I am somehow drawing a blank on their best defensive tackle. Don't don't judge me. I know all of these obscure players. It's just blocking me from knowing the real relevant ones. But Jared Verse, amazing edge rusher, second most pressures in the league for all players. I will be remiss for not remembering their best defensive tackle's name. But either way, they're amazing on the line. They can really take over games. They can just get you so behind the eight ball with a first or second down sack, and then on third down when they know you're passing, it just gets violent. So that mixed with coverage that's sound, good coverage from coaching perspectives, I think they're really good. So obviously with McVay on offense, but uh is it Lombardi? I think the defensive coordinator. He's doing great as well. Really good young mind there. So much to like about this team. I really am, you know, struggling to figure where to put them because I don't know if it's my heart telling me to put them in the Super Bowl tier or if it really just is, there is so much to like there. My numbers tell me put them in at dark horse, and I am lame, so I will do that, but I'm putting them in as the highest, even above Indy. I think the Rams just have a lot more solidified in what they do than Indy, despite Indy being better to this point. So, I think that's fair then to have both those teams there, especially, with Buffalo. Buffalo, the darling, Josh Allen, and offensive line. What more could you need? You don't need anything else, right? And there's no other positions to football. But Rams and Colts, I think, are in that same sort of vein. So if I have the Colts there, I should put the Rams there. Miami, pretty, whatever. Negligible -1 expected points added on offense, despite Tua sucking, Tyreek being hurt, terrible pass blocking for the 78th year in a row, seemingly. That, to me, must speak to Mike McDaniel not being the issue and kind of just being the scapegoat. This team is just not good. that applies to their defense as well. Worst defensive expected points added in the league, despite seemingly having a real identity with the defensive line. Pouring some good resources in there. They inexplicably traded for Fitzpatrick for Ramsey, got a less important position, got a worse player. I guess he is younger, but he's not young, so it's still just weird. Lots of, strange stuff there. So makes you wonder, even if you're the most casual of casuals that think pressure matters more than coverage, is that actually the case? So they're going in as, let me see. Can I really put them ahead of anybody? I don't think so. I'm putting them in as the worst team so far. So, Minnesota. They are so disappointing. The offense sucks due to their quarterback play, but receiver wise, Jefferson and Addison's about as good as it gets. That's an elite duo. Offensive line's really good. KOC continues to dial up nice plays. That's really maintained a good rushing game as well, despite not having great running back play. I mean, they got Cam Akers in the fold at any extent in 2025, the year of our Lord. I think his legs stopped being viable back in like 2022, 2023, that era. And, they don't get better over time. So that really speaks to where they are with that. So, that's, I guess, the other thing aside from McCarthy being seemingly not NFL caliber and Wentz just not being, you know, average or better. So, defensively, real weird. You beat the blitz, you beat them. If you do anything but that, you're going to be in for a long game because Flores will come at you every single play. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You know, they'll do two high shells with blitzes, which is weird. Usually it's a one safety deep look, but they'll do too high to limit the deep stuff. And they'll really mess with you because even though they're covering deep, their linebackers that are fast and can really cover, like Cashman, will muddy the seemingly wide open short stuff. So, very unique team. Really one of the most weird ones in the league. Unfortunately, weird doesn't, you know, get them where they need to be with this level of quarterback play. I also just realized the Raiders are ahead of Minnesota. That's a bit of a flub there on my part. So, doing all this talking with Minnesota as the Raiders are the team there. That in my defense, I have this sorted by NFELO's sorting, and they still have Las Vegas listed as Oakland. So that was the confusion with my alphabetical there. I do understand that L comes before M in the English language, but Minnesota, I'm gonna put them ahead of Jacksonville. I think not quite what Chicago can be since Caleb just seems like it's such better option than Wentz and McCarthy. I think Jacksonville and them's close. Finally, we get back to who we should have been talking about in the Raiders. They're terrible. So, not really much to say there. Oh, Pete Carroll, Geno Smith, amazing Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, solid offensive line, an insane reach on running back, in the top 10 when your team sucks and, won't be good in the 4 years that a running back will be good for. So, you know, with that said, though, you figured the offense was going to be good. You had lots of the positions checked, and then you reach on the running back that was good, but is a running back. In the end, you end up with the third worst offensive points, expected points added, rather, on offense. That's a classic. Pete Carroll right there, getting the least with the most. and he's cool. He's like 94 years old, and he looks like he's just old, not super old. So that's cool. But he doesn't know football past like 2010, so that's not great. Cool guy though. So there is at least that. And Geno Smith has sucked. Who's to say how much is on Carroll with that? Maybe Geno just has forgotten how to play football. Who's to say? But I do also blame Carroll for refusing to run a defense that's been viable in the past 15ish years. So I think that's holding back the defense back, despite the defense also just being really bad. So they are going, I guess, ahead of Miami. This cluster down here just sucks, man. It really does suck. These are some really bad teams. So next we have a team that is not really bad though, and is delighting me because the offense is inflated from playing the number 2 worst defense of schedule for expected points added, but May is doing so much with so little. The offensive line, pass blocking wise, PFF has them ranked second, which is a big upgrade from them probably being last year at the very best 30th, I would say, for pass blocking last year. Lots of injuries, but Campbell has looked the part. Bradbury has somehow been, you know, NFL level for once, not just getting thrown back to the quarterback every single play as soon as the hike's off. So, they do have a little bit of help from May there. Diggs is looking like he was hoped to be. After that, not really much in the receiver department, but May showing why I thought he was number 1 caliber. Some other people did too. So lots of fun stuff there, despite not really having, the receiver talent you would like. Defensively, inflated there as well. Their schedule really has been super bad. They're the second worst offensive expected points added faced, but they have stars everywhere. Gonzalez can shut down elite receivers, good secondary, really promising line with Barmore and Milton Williams, decent edge stuff. So they have that not great with names today. They have that edge rusher that's like 280 pounds that is really interesting. He's been solid, and then Harold Landry's been pretty all right. Plays every snap. Doesn't play at the highest level, but plays pretty well. So here, I'm gonna put New England in the playoffs and pray. I do think. Let's see, where do I put them though? I think I'm putting them ahead of Baltimore. I am going against my numbers a little bit there, but I do think my numbers are a bit skewed with priors being held on more than is reasonable given what Baltimore has shown this year. It's just been so bad. Also going to put them, in fact, over Dallas. So, a little bit of, you know, foreplay here is just me figuring it out how much I want to disagree from my precious, precious numbers. Do I put them ahead of Denver? I don't think I get there, but I could honestly see a world where they're the best team here ahead of the Texans even. So it is, you know, very very intriguing, the playoffs and pray. I see a world where the Patriots do go on a run because May has just been so otherworldly. Low key, the Saints kind of suck. Their offense is really bad, despite Spencer Rattler somehow being about average. And PFF pass blocking also has them about average too. So it's really on the receiver options that are just so bad. Olave unfortunately seems washed at this point. Kamara is washed. those remain the two best options. So it's really hard to have success like that. Defensively, they're merely below average. They're not totally just terrible. So that is a nice thing for them. I penciled them in as the worst team this year, but honestly, I don't think they're that. Not too far. Oops. Not too far above that, but I have them as the fourth worst team to this point and moving forward. So that's a, you know, noticeable difference. The Giants, they are really still trying to fix the Dave Gettleman debacle, as he's just so bad as a manager. He's ruined Panthers, ruined the Giants, just doesn't understand modern football at all, and isn't even good at evaluating the old school type of stuff he wants to do. So that's really hard. They were set back a lot by that. They have greater than average expected points added on offense, which speaks to Dart's potential. And honestly, despite being a running back, Scadaboo has been a player that's contributed to good offense. He's elite as a throwback grinding running back, not athletic, very physical. He's actually good though, despite that. At least for the next year or two before he just completely regresses. So, you know, they have a very short window for him, maybe a very long one with Dart. They also have a decent amount of vets on defense, decent amount of vets overall. Dart and Neighbors, and maybe uh, is it Andrews? I believe the left tackle. Maybe they can be building blocks. Neighbors hurt at the moment for the season, but maybe they can be the future. Defensively, they got a decent amount of guys in their prime. Offensively, the rest of the team's kind of in that mix as well. And defensively, despite potentially having just full stop the best defensive tackle, maybe the best run defending player in the league as well, in Sexy Dexy Dexter Lawrence, they have the worst rushing expected points added in the league and not a good defense overall. So they are really bad aside from him at defending the run. Carter, I guess, is another building block. He seems really good. I had him as the best player last year in the draft, way better than Travis Hunter. Forgot to mention him with the Jags. He hasn't been good. Weird that a really undersized receiver that didn't look refined at all was, not really producing at receiver. That seems odd. Who would have thought in, at like a Division 1.5 school in Colorado. And, a good corner, but not like the best at a Division 1.5 school once again. So, you know, Hunter, not too good. Carter, really good, as I projected. So that's a dub for me. I'll take that one in victory lap obnoxiously. So, with all of this said, I'm going to put the Giants behind Arizona, right with them, though. Pretty similar to Carolina as well, honestly. So, next we have the continually worse team of New Jersey, that being the New York quote unquote Jets. So, they are really abysmal. So profoundly bad. It is hard to watch. Year 5 of Justin Fields disappointing makes you wonder if it's even disappointing at that point, or if we just not me, I've been out on him for a while, but if people collectively have just, tried fitting him into being good when he simply is not. He can't process worth a lick. Great athlete. That's it. So, an absurd looking contract for him might actually just be absurd. and not some foresight from a team that never shows that. Aaron Glenn wasn't like an amazing hire at the time. He was a good defensive mind, not an elite one. Had a really good year with Detroit last year, but that was pretty much it. He's making Saleh look like a mastermind for defensive head coaches, as his star-studded defense plays terribly. They rank third worst in passing expected points added, despite having so much talent. So they really not good at pretty much anything. The run game with Fields and Hall and a solid line can be something. That's about it. I'm putting them in honestly as the worst team. I think they can hold up with the Dolphins, but the Dolphins at least have moments where they look feisty and like something. So yeah, they go there. Philly help get that bad taste out of our mouth a little bit with a good team here. Philly is really funny in that Howie Roseman, maybe, the best general manager the league's had, is at least the best true general manager, not like Belichick leading the Patriots type of deal. He lost so much clout with that Barkley debacle. He overpaid him. He extended him too much. And, that says he had 3 or 4 years in a row of being hurt or not good. Oftentimes a combination of both. In New York, he had that flash in the pan last year where he was not as good as Henry, but was the second best running back in the league. And, this year he's just god awful, one of the worst runners in the league, averaging 3 yards a carry behind a great line, and Hurts helping the run game. So Barkley is really bad, and, the bad move looks even worse now. So Roseman definitely whiffed on that. But in addition to that, the AJ Brown struggles have been problematic, of course. I love AJ Brown. He's a mental health king. So I'm rooting for him, especially. I like this team as a whole, honestly. It, you know, is nice to see that Hertz is playing so well. He is, I think, playing the best that he has because the supporting cast has been limited, but he's still really producing. Also, Smitty as the Batman for Brown's current Robin status so far has been refreshing for Devonta Smith. He is a great receiver, but has often been outshadowed by Brown, who's just incredible, continually top five. So Smith is getting some shine here. They and the continually elite offensive line has the offense remaining as still above average. Defensively, they're roughly average. Carter is currently being massively outplayed by Ojamo, which, if Carter was playing well and Ojamo was just playing great, that would be one thing, but Carter's just not playing well, and he's being an idiot, spitting on, Dak like a disrespectful hooligan. You know, he's known for doing dumb stuff. He did, after all, play a key role in somebody dying, but, the Dak stuff on the field was a different type of dumb. Not saying a worse type, just, you could be dumb off the field. Don't be dumb on the field. And he was dumb on the field too. And just, not playing well in addition to that. So he's not playing well. Uche is currently the most efficient edge rusher for them, which the edge room was like the one thing you could be a little bit skeptical of for them. It wasn't like a weakness, but it wasn't a strength by any means. So maybe Uche just is actually their best edge rusher. He has flashed for New England in one year in particular. I think it was like 2023 as an amazing pass rusher. He's back to being great for Philly, but maybe you don't want to rely on him as your lead guy. You probably don't. Jahad Campbell He's been a total star in his 7 games, which at linebacker is really, really impressive. It's a position that takes so long to develop. So, there's great players playing not great, and there's, Campbell playing great at a position where he might even be better moving forward. So that's really a lot to watch out for. So even though they're not really impressing to this point, they have 5 wins, which looks great, but it's kind of like the Chiefs of last year. They're getting lucky in that, points for and points against, 24 for both. So no different. Expected points added, neutral. It's, you know, not not really a great look so far, but the potential is so very much there that I am willing to take a swing on them. I do think they're better than the Chiefs without really any hesitation. I say that, but the dilemma is they are in a much much better conference. I think honestly the Rams are a better team than the Chiefs, but playing in the NFC where you have Detroit, Green Bay, of course, as competition versus the AFC where Colts and Bills aren't bad by any stretch, but just not up to snuff with the Lions and Packers. The NFC North, man, better than the AFC as a whole. So, with that said, I feel confident enough in what Philly projects to be that even without them showing to be amazing to this point, I'm putting them in the Super Bowl or bust category. I do think they could be in the dark horse because I do think Detroit and Green Bay have shown more to this point and have similar projections, but I do really like the baseline of Philly. And the reason I have them behind the Chiefs, despite thinking they're better than the Chiefs, is again just a conference thing. So if we're doing strictly based on team skill, I think I would have to this point the Chiefs behind all of the Super Bowl or bust teams, behind the Rams, and right there with the Colts. Probably have the Chiefs ahead of the Colts. I guess I would since they're in the higher tier in the same conference, but I think they're really close, honestly. So yeah, that's something to consider. And I'm talking in the aggregate for Super Bowl stuff because spoiler warning, there's not going to be another Super Bowl or bust team, and we're we're just gonna show then dark horse and below. That's evidenced by the fact that the Steelers are pretty in the mix for the remainder of these teams, and the Steelers are not good at football. So one thing to be good with them, they're also really bad culturally. So many bad off the field players recently, with Cam Sutton being a horrible player, horrible person. James Harrison, same deal when they brought him back. Lots of guys like that. So they got a terrible thing for culture. They have a terrible thing for football, despite being a bit fraudulent this far and looking better than they are. They're going to probably be another you know, wild card loss like they have been for, most of my life. Arthur Smith, he has affirmed my glaze as when they signed him to be their OC. I loved that move. Super high on it, despite him struggling a lot as a head coach. I thought he was an amazing OC. And, the Steelers haven't had good offense for so long. So I was like, maybe he can play a big part in turning it around. And I think he absolutely has. The Steelers are inexplicably number 6 in offensive expected points added with mentally and physically unwell Aaron Rodgers, Pickens being downgraded to the more expensive, older, worse, DK Metcalf, Broderick Jones being emblematic of the offensive line as a whole as he sucks. And, he continues to suck at left tackle, not just right tackle, which, that thing was always a farce. If you're bad at right tackle, you're going to be bad at left tackle and vice versa in 9 times out of 10. But, you're definitely not going to be good at right or bad at right tackle and be good at left tackle. That's slightly harder. Gets a little exaggerated by the casuals out there, but it is a little bit harder to this day, I would say. So yeah, Broderick Jones never was going to right that by moving to left tackle, and he hasn't. The difference in the Steelers' weakest opponent offensive expected points added and the second weakest is the same as the difference between the second weakest and the fifth weakest. So the Steelers have had far and away the weakest opponent offensive expected points added schedule to this point. They also spend over 27 million on defense more than the number 2 team. They also have a defensive head coach, and all of that combines for the 7th worst defensive expected points added. The math ain't mathin' there. The Steelers have a really bad defense despite, everything going their way. This is really funny to see in all actuality. There's so much wrong with this team, and you know, I guess you feel decent about them making the playoffs since Baltimore and Cincinnati have major quarterback injuries, and then Cleveland just sucks at football continually. But I think they're not good enough to the point I'm putting them in as not playoff, not number one. I don't think they have any angle for making noise in the playoffs. I think if they get to the divisional round, that will be very surprising. I think this team's probably worse than past iterations that have gotten blown out in the wild card. The only difference would be, with the AFC being banged up and not so hot, maybe things look differently, but this team is not good. Seattle, awful running, meh pass blocking. That restricts the dominance of Sam Darnold and Jackson Smith and Jigba having ungodly, out of this world, I can't stress it enough, production. He has 4.3 yards per route run, which I feel like you hear he has 4.3 yards every time he runs a route, and that's good. But for perspective, that's about 1 yard higher than number 2 Puka Nacua. And Puka Nacua at like 3.4, I think he's at roughly, is at a super high level as well. So JSN is at like all-time production so far. You expect that to regress because nobody really gets to that number and stays at that number. But I mean, through half a season almost he's been there, so it's like, still him doing that too as a bit of a newbie for being outside, done so much work in the slot through the years and is outside now. That's crazy. Again, they're a bit neutered by most of the other offense not being too good, but they're, I think, comfortably the best wide receiver quarterback duo, just receiver in general quarterback duo in the league right now. And they form a solidly above average offense pretty much just by themselves. Defensively, they're intriguing because there's just so many difficult matchups for opponents where they have a guru, Mike McDonald, as the defensive mind. He's figured it out seemingly with Seattle after a rough year last year where they kind of underachieved. He has the number 1 rushing expected points added defense. They have 5 of the league's top 50 in pressures, which is just absurd. Again, you're on average not going to have 2 on a team. They have 5. That's insane. And there's some really high end ones in there too, like Leonard Williams. So, he's great at the run defense part too. So there's lots of guys. I think the Lawrence from the Cowboys is even in the top 50, I believe. Which he was a flyer type of deal. Excuse the low battery warning. Will be good. So the the stuff there is incredible, and then on the back end, versatility out the wazoo with Devon Witherspoon. I loved him as a prospect. He's even way better than I thought he would be, as just like a super versatile canceller of basically every type of player. Emin Wari, great safety nickel option as well. Kobe Bryant, the best Kobe Bryant in sports history. Great corner. This one hasn't done anything sexually assaulty, so that's nice. He's also alive, so that's good. Uh, Julian Love is really good as well. There's lots of guys that can do lots of things on the back end to where Reek Woolen really struggling to this point, having another, polar year is kind of mitigated because these guys close so many deficiencies as just being able to do basically everything. So they are really, really legit on defense. And, if they can just get a little bit of production out of their line and run game, they're going to have a really prolific offense, too, you have to figure. So, really, really hard to put a cap on them. I do think they're in the mix for Dark Horse, but I do think Dark Horse here is a pretty steep bar to climb. So in the end, I'm going to put them in as playoffs and pray. They're mainly praying that they just don't implode from offensive line and rushing issues. But I do think they're right on the cusp of being a legit dark horse. So that's a very fun team there. Who would have thought Sam Darnold over Geno Smith would be like the much more reliable play after Donald has been so down for much of his career and then had one good year pretty much. For the other NFC West team, San Fran, Kyle Shanahan continues to produce on hard mode. Doesn't seem to matter who's on the team. Mac Jones, Brock Purdy, who can tell the difference? Purdy with like 50 million or 40 million or something, contract per year. Just, you know, Mac Jones comes in, looks the part. Just having a solid offensive line, not anything spectacular. Wide receiver two being Kendrick Bourne. Brandon Ayuk hasn't played. Kittle's missed time. Bourne was let go by New England, who don't have receivers. Christian McCaffrey's pretty washed, even though he's producing on fantasy just from, volume more so and getting receptions. So, not a lot of talent on offense and, even less on defense, to be completely frank. The sum is way better than the parts. They're above average, despite Bosa missing over half the year, having a ton of inexperience, either through just having young players or guys that really haven't contributed much through the years on the team. Still, Fred Warner being out for the year, the far and away the best guy for them, with Bosa being hurt, is, I think, a really big dilemma for them. Unfortunately, I think at a certain point, the talent is just going to have to be a thing. So, there's a lot working against them, I'll admit. I think they are low end playoffs and pray. I'll put them behind the Chargers even, who I don't think super highly of, but I just think this San Fran team that's always injured is once again injured, and just leaving them without the identity, the star talent, even though they do play really hard. So rooting for their success, I just don't feel great about it. For Tampa, I like that they have a lot of lucky wins. I'm a Baker guy. I have been since he was very abrasive in college, to be honest, but I kind of liked his moxie. I thought it was deserved. And, being a walk on, then a number one pick, and, you know, now being like an MVP candidate is incredible. The issue is he's making the most with least, and at the end of the day, he has the least pretty much. Exceptional Egbuka is a great target. Evans, Godwin, hurt, ineffective. Mid pass blocking, he has like his 58th NFL play caller, and, no running success, but they're still an average offense. That's really a testament to Egbuka and Baker. Pretty much no one else really pitching in. Defensively, they're also right around average despite an alleged guru as their head coach. They're, you know, they're a team that I think can be better than they've shown, but I also think they've gotten lucky, as weird as it is to say. So I'm going to put them ahead of San Fran. I don't think I can put them ahead of the Chargers. I think they're pretty similar to the Chargers. You're really banking on quarterback uplifting and, defense that's not playing well to play well. In the case of the Chargers, they haven't been bad, but there's just no talent there. The Buccaneers have some talent, it's just not really showing. Tennessee, this is a pretty quick one. Cam Ward is so dreadful. He's made Will Levis look like an okay quarterback in comparison. Nepo baby Brian Callahan is showing that he is indeed a Nepo baby, son of Bill Callahan, great offensive line coach. Brian Callahan probably doesn't belong in the league, at least at like a coordinator level, let alone head coach level. The offensive line's mid. They don't really have much of a strength there. Calvin Ridley is the only NFL caliber guy they have as a receiver or running back or tight end. If you want to say different than receiver. So Ridley, solid guy. Also another mental health advocate. I like him, but you don't want him being your number one and somehow also your number two and number three all at once. So them having the worst offensive expected points added in the league perfectly checks out. They are terrible. On defense, they're not bottom five like you would probably expect for expected points added. They're instead a very crisp number 7. So, 7 worst, that is. They are even worse than the Jets, which is impressive. Washington, on a small scale, just as I foretold on my mocks, Drake May is superior to Jaden Daniels. Daniels had the better rookie year. May's been way better second year. Second year matters more than rookie year because it's more recent. So I'm right. The haters are wrong. More broadly and in more serious ways, Daniels has been okay. He hasn't really been too much of anything. He's uplifted the team a little bit, I would say, but not to like a real notable degree. They have okay pass blocking, better than they had last year. Receivers are bad, like was to be expected. They're just mid offensively. Defensively, Dallas is a model of no stars, tons of scrubs. That somehow isn't bearing fruit for the defense either, which is fun considering Dan Quinn, head coach of Washington, not a good head coach, just solid-ish, if he can't do better, I guess he can hold it down type of guy. Was the DC for the Cowboys. Solid DC, but in no way, shape, or form a coach you want to hitch your wagon to. He's just there. He's just a guy. So Washington, no talent aside from Daniels pretty much on the entire team. McLaurin's a reasonable wide receiver number 1, not a good one, but a reasonable one. The line is better than average. Defense is pretty universally terrible, and they're playing like it. So, all of that is to say, I honestly don't think they're really a playoff caliber team. Maybe they get in, but I'm putting them in as not a playoff deserving team, not a number one overall type of team, but better than the Steelers. Just Washington, I guess, stands a chance if they get to the playoffs. The Steelers might get in just because of the division thing, AFC thing. Washington, though, I think is a little less bad. So this is what the list ends up looking like. Be sure to let me know in the comments where I went wrong. And thank you for watching. Be sure to value your mental health, but also the mental health of people around you. You never know what someone is going through. So thank you for watching, and have a good rest of your day or night.